Good evening and welcome. You are watching The Big Story on NDTV Profit and I'm Nupur Talwar Suri. Now, in what is being seen as a politically loaded move, the government has notified a middle-of-the-road unified pension scheme. The scheme aims to take the best of both the old and the new pension scheme and yet be fiscally prudent. To discuss the political and the economic ramifications, we are going to be joined by the former Finance Secretary Subash Chandra Garg and Amitabh Tiwari, a political strategist. But before we go on to the two gentlemen, let's go across to Pallavi Nahata to understand how this will actually impact employees and how how to choose the right scheme going forward.
Now, while the unified pension scheme assures a minimum pension to government employees, most labor unions continue to ask for a rollback of the employee contribution component. Now, the unified pension scheme does meet the demand of assured pension at 50% of the last drawn average pay. But it stays with the system where the employees too contribute towards their pensions and the entire burden does not fall on the government. While that's prudent for government finances, that's the part where most labor unions are unhappy. Assured family pension and assured minimum pension are also other pros of the unified pension scheme. For instance, in case of assured minimum pension, that stands at about 10,000 rupees a month on superannuation after a minimum of 10 years of service. Like we mentioned, what does not work is, of course, the fact that the unified pension scheme is also contributory in nature and employees are expected to contribute 10%. The fiscal impact of the unified pension scheme also is currently unclear. That's something that economists are still waiting for more clarity on to determine what the hit to the government will be. The government's outgo will depend on a number of factors, including how many employees actually opt for the unified pension scheme and what market returns are like, etc. But broadly, the impact is not expected to be too significant for the government.
All right, Pallavi, thank you very much for joining us with that report. And in fact, to discuss this further, we're now joined by Mr. Subash Chandra Garg, the former Finance Secretary of India, and Amitabh Tiwari. Both of you, good evening, and thank you very much for joining us.
Good evening.
To you first, Mr. Garg. Now, Mr. Garg, UPS has been pegged as a middle of the path that essentially involves contributions from employees and enhanced share from the center. Now, do you see this as a good amalgam of the old pension scheme and the new pension scheme? And essentially, what are your thoughts on it?
So this is exactly the thought which the government has also tried to say. That's middle of the road. It brings the advantages of the OPS in terms of the assured kind of pension to the employees, also to the family benefit and all. So that is what it is. But what worries me in a way is that the unraveling of the NPS has started. In fact, started a couple of years back when the government raised the contribution to 14%. Now accepting the principle of the defined benefit in the form of 50% pension, also to the family and all, that is the starting point to my mind. As your correspondent was also saying, there is murmur about what has not been given. For example, the GPF, to which the 10% used to go earlier, is still going into the pension scheme. So the employees would want that to be also taken away. There is little unclarity about whether the pension would be paid on the DA portion also or not. So I see broadly this as a movement towards a compromised, fairer solution. But this is not the end of the road. There would be pressures coming in times to come, and the government will probably ultimately end up adopting the OPS fully, as was the case in case of one rank, one pension, where finally, after many years of struggle, the government gave exactly what the ex-servicemen wanted in the form of the one rank, one pay.
Right, Mr. Garg, now the centerpiece of abolishing or going to the new regime was that it was not fiscally prudent since the pensions burden was too huge. Now that is a problem that we still seem to be grappling with. In fact, this UPS that they've come up with, the contribution from the government side now goes up to 18.4%, which is up from 14%. It will obviously cost the exchequer more annually. Do you think that the core problem of the burden being too large has still not been addressed?
So that's precise. That's quite correct. The government has accepted that the burden of the pension scheme, excluding the 10% contribution which comes from the employee, is all on the government. Now, that assessment is not possible today for anyone to make. You don't know how many people will, in my judgment, almost everyone will move, but you don't know what the kind of profile for the people is in terms of their pension requirement, how it will go up, what is the requirement for the family benefit and things like that. It will be a very difficult actuarial kind of assessment. So whether 18.5% will be able to take care of that gap in the requirement of the pension fund and the availability of the resources is still not clear. There is also another danger which we should be fully alive of. While the government today says that 18.5% will take care of the required gap, and the government will keeping it fully funded by paying this. There is no guarantee that in times to come, the governments will pay 18.5% or whatever is required to keep the fully funded scheme. If you want to have a parallel, the employee pension scheme administered by the EPFO has not been able to cover the gap. Another parallel, if you want to see, the sovereign gold fund bond scheme, which was launched in 2015, and it was promised that the gap between the eventual payment which is required to be made and the amount which the government got at the time of the issue of the bonds will be provided for in the form of reserve funds. Those funds were not provided. So I think we'll need to keep our eyes and ears open and keep a little bit of our fingers crossed about whether the scheme will be fully funded or not.
All right, let's also bring in Amitabh Tiwari now. The opposition has reacted, particularly the Congress, saying that this is a political move. It's a U-turn by the government. Now, do you see this as a populist move, and obviously one that is aimed at tackling pressure from the opposition as well as, trying to woo in government sector employees? Of course, there is some talk of Delhi going to election soon, and they do have a large, government employee base.
So essentially, I mean, in India or anywhere else as well, I mean, you cannot differentiate the economic policy decisions from politics. So correct. So these both are intertwined, interdependent, and related. So it seems that the government or the BJP government, after a setback in the Lok Sabha elections, where it was not able to achieve simple majority of its own, has carried out some feedback analysis and has got a feedback that perhaps this scheme or this promise of the opposition that they would restore the OPS whenever they come back to power, and they have been saying this for some of the states as well where they are in power, led to some losses for the government. So as they've said that there are some 23 lakh central government employees which are likely to benefit from this. And also there are state elections coming, which is 4 this year and 1 or 2 in the next year, including Delhi. And these are very crucial elections because if the India bloc does well, then it continues with the momentum. It's a coalition government. So that's why the BJP perhaps feels that this momentum somehow has to be stopped. And it has adopted a middle path. So it's not my way or highway sort of a thing. So it has come up with the UPS acronym somewhere between OPS and NPS. And it feels or believes that this could neutralize some of the disillusionment or discontent amongst the central government employees and could have an impact on the elections as well.
All right, but Amitabh, the other part of the picture is that with these changes, the BJP does seem to lose some of its differentiating factors, because the criticism from the opposition is then going to be that you are reacting to the criticism that we have made of you, and hence you are no different from us. Do you think that is a card that the opposition will play next?
See, it is becoming tricky for the supporters of the BJP on social media as well as other mediums where they have been defending the government on these policies like the NPS or the lateral entry or the farm bills, etc., wherein BJP has taken some sort of a backstep. So this gives the ammunition to the opposition that perhaps whatever they have been demanding or saying is right, and even gives this feeling, as you said, that to a section of the supporters or the neutral voters, let's say, not or the non-aligned voters, that BJP, while it claims that it's a very different party or a party with a difference, perhaps is not that different from other political parties. So that is something which the BJP needs to work on, because some of the contentious bills in the past have also been taken back, and this does not send a good signal to the, I would say, the non-aligned or the neutral voters who have been backing the party. The other way to look at it is that it's a fairly flexible party. It takes feedback into account and is not fairly rigid, and feedback is reaching the government, etc. So that's also another way of looking at it. So we'll have to see how many people lie on both sides of this spectrum, and that is what will ultimately decide whether this decision is taken is seen as some sort of a compromise or taken under political pressure, or seen as a pragmatic, practical decision after severe rounds of feedback.
Right, Mr. Garg, if I could come back to you. Mr. Garg, there seem to be still, a lot of grey areas which the government will perhaps have to go further. I can see you smiling. Are there any points that you'd like to make to that political debate as well?
No, the politics of this, if you want to see in an administrative sense, the fact that the scheme has not been fully spelled out, the scheme has not been fully configured. Even the basic questions like who will disperse the pension to the new UPS employees who retire? Will it be the government or a government agency, or someone will provide an annuity, right? Like it was happening in the case of NPS. That question has not been decided. And that's very crucial decision, because if you look at the annuity providers, I don't think in the kind of configuration which has been presented, any annuity provider can provide the annuity. So it will have to fall back on the government, where from the government will pay it. The 10 plus 10 comes back, or 8.5% will take care of the gap. So all these issues which are very important to be decided before the scheme should have been announced fully, and whether the employees are willingly accepting the grayer areas. For example, if there is no pension on the DA part, or the GPF will remain unprovided to them except to the extent of this 10% for 6 months kind of thing. Is there a willing acceptance? So if these questions are not decided, I don't think the political buyout is fully factored in, or can be fully factored in. And in this situation, its intention appears to be quite clear, that elections are coming. At this moment, seize the initiative by saying that you are getting 50% of the pension, and keep the difficult part of configuration for later on. So I think there is a political intent behind announcing this scheme now than later. The question whether this is adopting the Congress agenda, and by the way, I hold a very clear opinion that any attempt to go back to OPS is a fiscally disastrous attempt, and any government which is trying to go to that is actually doing a great disservice to the nation. And therefore, but if you are adopting that agenda, then you're trying to neutralize the opposition, and there lies the major confusion politically also. So the intent appears to be only to seize the current momentum. I think that is the political aspect of it.
Right, absolutely. And that was what I was referring to when I talked about the differentiating factors between these two political parties. Amitabh, one final question. Now, Maharashtra has, interestingly, been the first state to adopt it. In fact, the government announced it. And the next day, we had the Maharashtra government come out and say that it is now going to go with this new, or rather the unified pension scheme. Any thoughts on that? And do you think that's a move that politically could benefit the current dispensation?
See, if you see the Eknath Shinde-led government was one of the first non-BJP governments to publicly announce that it was looking at some sort of an OPS scheme to be restored. This was even before the general elections, because BJP is not the only partner in this alliance. They have Shiv Sena and NCP Ajit Pawar as well. So, of course, I think there were discussions in the Maharashtra BJP or the NDA government that this needs to be restored, or some sort of a middle path needs to be achieved. And that's why we've seen that perhaps they have been one of the fastest to accept or to adopt these recommendations of the scheme. See, what happens is that when you are on a back foot, correct? So the Lok Sabha election results clearly showed that the Mahavikas Aghadi or the MB or the India bloc is on a stronger foot comparatively. I mean, in the elections, anything can happen, but they seem to be the favorite as of now, as per initial polls. So these are some of the steps of the Ladli Behna scheme, or this 50% assured pension, etc. These are some of the schemes which the government feels that, or the Maharashtra government feels that, could help them recover some of the lost ground and make the elections a tight contest. So that's why they are betting on some of these schemes now.
All right. Amitabh Tiwari as well as Mr. Garg, thank you very much for joining us this evening on this big story debate, whether the new scheme that's been announced by the government is fiscally prudent and is it one that's politically motivated.